get started, I'm going to read some notes on how we're going to conduct tonight's meeting. This meeting of the Pacifica Planning Commission will be conducted pursuant to the provisions of Government Code Section 54953, as amended by AB 361, which authorizes teleconference meetings under the Brown Act during certain proclaimed states of emergency. The Governor of California proclaimed a state of emergency related to COVID-19 on March 4th, 2020. This teleconference meeting is necessary so that the city can conduct essential business and is permitted under Government Code Section 54953 in order to protect public health and safety of attendees. Consistent with Government Code Section 54953, this Planning Commission meeting will be held via teleconference only, and there will be no physical location open to the public. Planning commissioners and staff will teleconference into the meeting by audio and/or video. The public can observe the meeting remotely via the Zoom link as the primary means of participation, or via cable channel 26 or live stream broadcasts as alternate methods of viewing the meeting. Participation via the Zoom link will enable the meeting to be observed live and will enable the public to speak during public comment periods. The Zoom link was published in the meeting agenda. Live public comments are being accepted at this meeting. Public comments may be provided live by members of the public utilizing the Zoom link to participate in the meeting. Utilize the raise hand function in the Zoom application on a computer, smartphone, or tablet, or else enter *9 to raise your hand if dialing in by phone. Please ensure your name is correctly entered in your Zoom profile so city staff properly identify you when it is your turn to speak. Those dialing in by phone will be called to speak by the last 4 digits of their phone number, as shown in the Zoom interface. And with that said, can we start with a roll call, please?
Chair Berman.
Here.
Commissioner Godwin.
Here.
Vice Chair Hauser.
Here.
Commissioner Wright.
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Wright is present as he responded to the roll call, but he's having trouble with his video this evening and likely will be on audio only without video for most, if not all, of the meeting.
All right, we'll move on to salute to the flag. Vice Chair Hauser, can you lead us in the salute to the flag, please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hauser. All right, Mr. Murdoch, do we still take public comment prior to administrative business? I know that was a comment in the past.
Yes, Chair, we do.
Okay, all right, great. Then I'll open up public comment for administrative business, anything that shows as administrative business on the agenda, which there isn't much. Let me know if there's any public comments.
No hands are raised.
All right, I'll close the public comment for the administrative business and we'll move on to approval of the order of agenda. Can we have a motion for the order of agenda? Vice Chair Hauser.
I'll make a motion to approve the order of the agenda.
All right, and do we have a second? Commissioner Wright.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Please, roll call vote, please.
Chair Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Wright.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We have no minutes to approve. And it looks like for designation of liaison to city council meeting, we have none.
Correct.
All right. Then on to oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes.
And Chair, there is one participant with its hand raised. I'm having trouble with the timer at present, so I will keep track of the time manually and give a warning at 1 minute. So, Cliff Lawrence, please go ahead.
Right. Good evening. My name is Clifford Lawrence. Good evening, commissioners. I've spent some time reflecting on our recent quest to update the general plan from almost a half a century ago. Personally, and I don't think this was unique, I'm exhausted, but also feeling largely defeated. As the City Council took up for consideration of your recommended general plan with revisions, we were told the City Council didn't need for the Planning Commission to see and confirm their final product. That step was not required because in the end, it was just a recommendation to the City Council. This gave me pause. In that statement, did I hear that the Planning Commission's role had just been disempowered by city staff? I had listened to the commissioners ask wide-ranging set of thoughtful questions. I had also listened to scores of citizens offer comment, corrections, additions, revisions. It seemed in the main, staff said in effect, if not in these words, that the minimum requirements had been met. Did anybody say these documents couldn't be improved? Are we choosing just to meet the minimum requirements while dismissing efforts to improve the product? What is behind this refusal to improve the product, more specifically, the safety element? The answer, apparently, if none other is available, is expediency. The real question is who is driving this expediency? Is it the City Council, the City Manager, or the City Planning Department? What's the rush? After almost half a century, we don't have the time. Is there something driving this urgency that has not been revealed to the public? Who is really making our choices, or should I care?
1 minute remaining.
Will we actually choose to just meet the minimum requirements and not produce our best work? I hope not. From a Pacifican octogenarian, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Murdoch, are there any additional comments?
There are no other hands raised, Chair Berman.
Okay, thank you. I'll close the oral communications portion. I guess with that, I know we've talked about it in the past, but perhaps Mr. Murdoch, can you help touch on the review and approval process of the general plan timeline, maybe how it relates to the housing element?
Yes, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Acting Planning Director Christian Murdoch. There, I think, are a number of reasons why it's in the city's best interest to update its general plan. I think one notable example that you mentioned, Chair Berman, is the need to commence work on the housing element update as required by state law. And as I've said in multiple occasions during open sessions of the Planning Commission and the City Council, the city needs a new set of tools in its toolbox to rise to the challenge of planning for the nearly 2,000 housing units that are required through this housing element update cycle. And so without having updated information about properties that have developed, increasing the available types and density of land use designations, having updated information about hazards and a variety of other updated information sources, undertaking that housing element update process would be much more challenging than with an updated general plan. And there are statutory timelines for when the housing element update needs to be concluded. And so the sooner that the city would be able to adopt the general plan update, the better in that sense. Additionally, I think it's not staff's perspective that this general plan update process was rushed in any way. The process began in the 2008-2009 timeframe and has had an extensive amount of public engagement, numerous community meetings and other input opportunities. And so it was a very thorough and deliberate process on the part of the city, but every planning process needs to culminate at some point, hopefully with adoption of the plan. And that's precisely what the city did with the general plan update.
Thank you so much. And I truly appreciate all of staff and our consultants' efforts to create the general plan and address the updates that we did provide comments on, as well as the Sharp Park specific plan, which we'll be looking at tonight. Next up, consent items. It looks like we have none. And then on to our first agenda item in continued public hearings. And our continued public hearing tonight is consideration of the Sharp Park specific plan and recommendation to City Council. Recommended CEQA action is find adoption of the Sharp Park specific plan substantially consistent with the general plan update and Sharp Park specific plan final environmental impact report. State Clearinghouse number 2012-022-046. Recommended action is adopt the attached resolution to recommend City Council approval of the Sharp Park specific plan. And I know so this is a continued public hearing item. So we did review several chapters of larger major comments that the commission did have. The plan tonight is, and that allowed staff some time to kind of grasp those comments and digest them a bit and come back here tonight with any clarification questions. But tonight's also an opportunity to provide staff and the consultants with any additional comments that we may have exhaustively throughout the document. With that said, I'll turn it over to Acting Planning Director Murdoch to give us a staff report, please.
Thank you, Chair Berman, and good evening again, Planning Commissioners. I'm joined tonight by a staff and consultant team, including Allison Moore and Rajiv Bhatia from our consultant Diet and Bhatia, as well as Deputy Public Works Director and City Engineer Sam Bautista, and Associate Engineer Ryan Marquez. And then, of course, we have our support from Assistant City Attorney Deepa Sharma for any legal questions that come up related to the Sharp Park specific plan. Just to provide a brief overview, again, of where we are in the process, the Planning Commission started its focused discussion of the Sharp Park specific plan on June 20th, made it through chapters 1 through 5 and provided a number of focused comments. Staff has taken note of those comments in a handful of areas. We've recognized we want to bring back some of that feedback the commission gave us to make sure that we got it correctly and to validate the Planning Commission's input on those points, and then to continue the consideration and to receive additional input. So what I would propose is that we have Allison Moore present those various points where we're seeking further clarification from the commission. And then we can answer any questions, have some deliberation from the commission, and then when appropriate, move on to other topics for further discussion.
You're on mute, Allison.
Forgive me. Is that better? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. So I'm just gonna need 1 second to get my slides. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So there were a few items from the last meeting where commissioners asked us to regroup with some additional suggestions as well as staff recommendations that have emerged. As Christian noted, we're just seeking confirmation. So the first was a request to expand the planning boundary to encompass Pacifica Beach Park because there were applicable policies there. And upon further reflection, the team actually recommends keeping the boundaries as is for consistency with the certified EIR. So the policy that applies to Pacifica Beach Park, that is 6-I-12, is about supporting park improvements envisioned as part of the public plaza along Beach Boulevard project. And that is included currently in the city's capital improvement program. So to balance the fact that this policy, we want to be supportive of the improvements, but it does exist just outside of the planning boundary, we propose describing this planning effort in the narrative to capture that. There was robust conversation about FAR minimums and desired development at Eureka Square. We heard 3 requests. The first is to add minimums for mixed-use neighborhood and mixed-use center. So to do that, we added a minimum of 0.15 to mixed-use neighborhood and 0.12 to mixed-use center. We heard a request to add a requirement for commercial as part of Eureka Square development. And to do that, we added a requirement to include 0.3 of the total FAR at Eureka Square to be commercial. And then we also heard a desire to build in an incentive for additional commercial at Eureka. And so to do that, we established the density for Eureka at 30 dwelling units per acre, with an additional bonus of 10 dwelling units per acre with every additional 0.1 ground floor commercial FAR, up to the maximum of 50. And that FAR would be, as noted in the footnotes, it would be interpolated to the nearest hundred. So you could do 0.12 FAR, and then you wouldn't interpolate that to get you your additional density. We also heard that there was a desire to be consistent with the general plan in terms of the developable area. And so we did change that to gross acreage, but we did note certain exclusions for environmental constraints, including steeper slopes, wetlands avoidance, erosions, or easement constraints there. And then there was another note too about the maximum non-residential FAR. We're going to keep that as 2.5 because we want the 2212 Beach Boulevard site to be able to develop with all non-residential uses. There was also a desire for more clarification on the different types of commercial envisioned in Sharp Park. So this table indicates some examples and the differences between community serving, neighborhood serving, and visitor serving. And so community serving draws from the wider Pacifica community. These are usually slightly larger commercial uses. Neighborhood serving commercial largely draws from a neighborhood clientele, includes convenience, personal services, hardware stores, and other smaller commercial development. And then visitor serving commercial, I think Christian noted this last time, but it is a priority in the coastal zone. And it includes uses like museums, commercial recreational uses, restaurants, or retail. And then some of these uses may overlap. I think a good example of that is a restaurant. That's something that is both community serving, something that we heard a lot of residents in Sharp Park wanting more of, and then it can be visitor serving as well. We also talked about some additional east-west options for bicycle connections, particularly along San Jose. So we did find that to be a feasible bicycle connection. And then there was also an additional suggestion to potentially add Santa Rosa as a second tier connection to provide better connectivity to the pier. And then this too would also fit the existing circulation pattern where San Jose is westward and then Santa Rosa would be eastward back to the pedestrian bridge. We also corrected the section drawings to reflect the correct width of the parking and the travel lane because these are one-way streets. And we did confirm these with the city engineer. And I did just want to note, we didn't really get into this last time, but some of the improvements like the sidewalk widening could potentially affect existing encroachments in the public right-of-way, and implementation in the future of these improvements may necessitate removal of such encroachments. And what I mean by that is that you add all of these numbers together and it's slightly less than the right-of-way. And in some cases, there have been encroachments into this small area, and that the improvements would go towards the property line into the right-of-way in order to make some of these improvements. I just want to note that. And then here's San Jose with the shared lane added. And then Clarendon, the parking lanes corrected to be the appropriate width. And then finally, we did discuss changes to the parking standards. These included adding reference to what parking looks like for accessory dwelling units, allowing tandem spaces in multifamily, addressing garage access that backs onto public streets and where that is prohibited or discouraged. We did add the stipulation that this is except where a property has no other frontage, because there are some properties that can only back onto an arterial. We did add a stipulation for the exemption of the 2,000 square feet, as we discussed last time, but we added at the discretion of the planning director, such as when required to improve site design. Christian can talk more about that after I finish. And then we also did add shared parking arrangements at discretion of the planning director as well. And then I did just want to note that there could potentially be an additional policy to support reduction of curb cuts and frontage dedicated to vehicle access in the form of encouraging joint use driveways via access easements. So those just represent some of the recommendations made, just seeking to confirm that these are appropriate, or if there's anything else that you would like us to look into. With that, I will turn it back over to Christian and you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. And so we look forward to receiving the Commission's feedback on our integration of your feedback from June 20th. And at the opportune time, also look forward to continuing on with discussion of the remaining chapters in the specific plan and any additional comments the Commission may have on chapters that we've already gone through on June 20th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. If no one on the Commission is opposed, I'm thinking that we open it up to public comment. All right. Let's open up public comment.
There are no hands raised, Chair.
Okay. Oh, I just saw one pop up.
All right, I'm going to try a different timer application here. So let's see if this works. Cliff Lawrence, please go ahead.
Hello again, this is Clifford Lawrence. I really wasn't anticipating speaking, but in the absence of others, my primary question to you is, how do we, this specific plan for Sharp Park, does it not in fact have to get approved by the Coastal Commission? And if it does, what do we think our prospects are of getting it passed by the Coastal Commission when they haven't finished with the certification of our coastal plan? And I've heard it said that where we're at on the coastal plan is, I heard the phrase, it's out of our hands. And I thought that the Coastal Commission had quite clearly provided the language that they are expecting to see in this document before their approval. So could you clear some of that up, please? Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is going to be Cindy Abbott. Please go ahead.
Good evening. I also wasn't sure if there would be ability for public comment tonight. So thank you for having it. And to follow up on the comments from Cliff Lawrence, I really had some significant concerns at the last meeting to hear city planning staff imply that the California Coastal Commission might disregard the sound advice of their staff. Their guidance has included strong and repeated statements by California Coastal Commission staff that the Sharp Park specific plan and the portions of the general plan that relate to the coastal zone must be reviewed and approved based on the 1980 approved LCLUP. More specifically, the policies proposed in the Sharp Park specific plan and general plan cannot contradict the certified LCP. And yet there was a comment made several times actually that we'll just work through it when we get there. But the Coastal Commission has continually told you they're not going to approve that and that these should be resolved. Any issues can only be based on the current approved LCP. Staff has repeatedly, in letters that go back for a number of years, asked for clarification, specifically of things, including the potential impacts of the proposed maximum heights up to 55-foot structures. There's also been well-documented concerns about the proposed Beach Boulevard Resiliency Project that so much of the Sharp Park Pacific Plan seems to be riding on. To say that the Coastal Commission would not follow staff's recommendation flies in the face of other actions that the Coastal Commission has taken with regard to the city of Pacifica. Two recent projects have gone to the Coastal Commission in appeals, 1567 Beach Boulevard and the property down in San Pedro by the shopping center that were approved here by the city, by the Planning Commission and City Council, and then strongly denied by the Coastal Commission. So please ask and really think through, why are we doing this? Why aren't we working through and resolving the issues with the Coastal Commission and their staff before moving ahead in this project, so that we don't put everyone in a really untenable position of saying that there's an approved plan, but it's really not anything that decisions can be based on until the update to the local coastal program is approved by the Coastal Commission. Thank you.
There are no other hands raised, Chair Berman.
All right, then I will close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission. Just kind of touching on some of the topics that the commenters mentioned. Mr. Murdoch, can you please remind us of staff's effort in engaging and coordinating with the Coastal Commission, and also perhaps an update on the LCLUP timeline? And then lastly, how the approval of the Sharp Park specific plan and adoption will relate to engagement with the Coastal Commission.
Absolutely, Chair Berman. So the city is in the process of working with the California Coastal Commission to obtain certification of the local coastal land use plan, or LCLUP. The City Council approved that document in February of 2020, and we've been working since then to achieve filed status with the Coastal Commission staff such that the LCLUP submitted by the city could advance to a hearing process. While I respect the comments of the public, I understand that the process can be somewhat confusing, but it's the city's position that the city staff is not authorized to make changes to a document that's already been approved by the city council. And so therefore, we've noted the Coastal Commission staff's continued comments on the certification draft LCLUP that the city has submitted to it, but informed them of the limitations of our authority and have asked the Coastal Commission as soon as possible to set the item for hearing and to provide the staff's official, formal, final recommendations to the full Coastal Commission. And then we will respect whatever outcome the Coastal Commission itself ultimately takes on certification draft LCLUP. And so it's premature at this point in time for the city staff to agree to any such changes, as I mentioned. And the city council was fully informed about what the Coastal Commission staff's comments were on the LCLUP. And the city council made the appropriate decision that it felt was necessary and appropriate for the city of Pacifica at that point in time. With respect to timeline for certification, it is out of the city's hands. We've tried to be responsive to the Coastal Commission's requests for information, and we continue to work through that process. If and when they ultimately accept the application for filing, there's typically a 90-day period within which they are required to act, but they can also trigger a 12-month extension to allow them additional time to process that certification draft LCLUP. So the timeline is unclear and it is out of the city's hands to a large extent. With respect to what will follow after a potential adoption of a Sharp Park specific plan by the city, a very similar process will follow. The Planning Commission and subsequently the City Council will be fully informed of what the Coastal Commission staff's comments are on the document. And as provided in the Coastal Act, as the City Council did with the LCLUP, the City Council will determine what's most appropriate for the city's local coastal planning documents and take final action to approve the document. And then the city will submit it to the Coastal Commission for certification as well. And so that's the established process in the law. And there are various ways to go about that process prior to final city action. But once that process has been concluded by the city, it's then with the Coastal Commission for action on their timeline as provided in law. I think there was a third question there, but I don't want to misstate what that may have been.
In my opinion, you covered it. Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. So now I'll open it up to the commission if there's any general questions on what staff presented or general comments on the Sharp Park specific plan. But what I intend to do is start from chapter 1. And I think we're probably going to get through 1 through 5 pretty quickly since we did such a thorough job last time. But now we're doing an exhaustive review. So starting with chapter 1 and then hopefully getting all the way to the end tonight. Vice Chair Hauser.
Thank you, Chair. I definitely had some questions and comments on what staff presented. I think as far as like an exhaustive review, I think at least on my part going through 1 through 5, I think I provided pretty exhaustive comments of the last meeting, and I sent in writing to staff and to the city attorney's office what those were. So I'm happy to represent those, but I don't know. I personally thought they were clear. So let me start with Ms. Moore. If you could please go back to your presentation. And let me just preface this by saying that my brain doesn't quite work like this. I need time, especially with things like FAR calculations, to really absorb them and understand what we're actually saying. So reviewing, this is the first time that the commission is seeing this. And so what I can give you at this juncture is my first response, my first sense, and the first questions that kind of come to my mind, because I do have some kind of large clarifications. But I will also say that I'd like to kind of reserve the right to add additional feedback or additional questions as we go on, because again, this is really impactful stuff. And I don't just want to say, yeah, we got it, right? Because I think that there's still some stuff to be desired. So I wanted to start with Eureka Square, the second bullet point. And I think I'll get to the chart in a second. I think that this kind of partially captured the conversation about Chapter 3 and Eureka Square, but I don't think it really fully got what I was trying to convey. And what I mean by that is, I think I said on the dais last time around that I don't think that going from 30 to 50 dwelling units per acre incentivizes a developer to build more commercial. I think that the more profitable densities happen to be on the lower end of this scale. And I think that if you're building at 50 dwelling units per acre, you're probably an affordable housing developer that is going to density bonus out of the commercial anyway. So what my thought was, and I think what the commission agreed to, although anyone should jump in and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but the conversation was that in light of all of the new and continually evolving state laws, designating something as mixed use is essentially designating it as housing, unless we're actively thinking about how we want to keep this commercial. And we've already underscored the importance of having commercial in this area. We're talking about having 2,000 square feet of parking excused commercial space to help incentivize this and to have all of these strong and vibrant ground floor uses. So I believe what the true ask was creating several policies that are specifically designed so that a market rate developer can't come into Pacifica and waive or concession out of the commercial. In that same vein, we wanted to create a FAR minimum that would get us to approximately the current amount of square footage, which I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was 65,000 square feet. So my first question on that is, am I correctly remembering that there's currently 65,000 square feet of commercial? And since I don't have my handy dandy calculator in hand, what does 0.2 equate to on a 5-acre site?
Rajiv, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So Commissioner Hauser, we do know the footnote states that the commercial on that Eureka Square site shall be a minimum FAR of a 0.3. So we're already beyond 0.2 for that site. I totally get what you're saying about waiving out commercial requirements. A couple of points I want to sort of backtrack just a little bit. When the city does the housing element, the city will be relying on default densities to be providing affordable housing. The default density in the Bay Area happens to be 30 units per acre. So if we were to use a default density that's lower than 30, the city may not be able to count these sites for providing lower income units. So we'll be handicapping the city. But I totally get your point of view that they may waive it. So one, and I'm just thinking right now in response to your comment that one approach is to say, to limit housing development to half the site or something like that. So, which means that on the other half, they'll never be able to waive the commercial requirements because the general plan will say you're limited to half the site. You want to put all your density on there, on the starting at the ground floor from residential, fine. But overall, you're still required to do a 0.3. We don't care if it's on ground floor or 2 floors or God knows whatever retail format you have. It's going to end up being on the ground floor. We know that. And they'll end up putting parking, like a deck parking or something like that. But that's a very good observation that they could try to waive it out, yeah.
Well, and Mr. Boston, I'm so glad you're here because I think that you were the one who really underscored this at the last meeting. And I'm not saying that 30 dwelling units per acre is the wrong density. I just think what I'm saying is I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that providing above 30 and up to 50 is a way to, incentivize what we want. And I think what you just said and some of the other ideas we talked about at the last meeting are closer to how to get what we want. Because again, we don't want to be we are a bedroom community, right? We don't want to just be a bedroom community, and we don't want retail leakage where everyone's leaving and going to Serramonte and Colma. So I would like to see that reconceived somewhat closer to what you just described. And then if you would humor me, is the 0.3 minimum FAR, does that equate to the 60,000 square feet that we talked about last time? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. And then I do want to look more at the gross acreage, because I think I need to think a little bit more about, you know, whether it's appropriate to net out a, you know, an exception. Let's see. Sorry, there's so much change on this slide. I'm trying to read and think at the same time. Can you go, I'm sorry, can you go, Ms. Moore, to the next slide? I had a question on the next one after this, I think, the one with the one where you talked about encroachments, sidewalk encroachments. I didn't quite follow what you were describing, but I appreciate, and I'll defer to Chair Berman because she's so much more knowledgeable, but I appreciate that the parking is now feasible.
So Vice Chair Hauser, what we're trying to describe with respect to the encroachments is that historically there has been several feet in many cases behind the sidewalks, or where no sidewalks exist behind the curbs in a number of these streets in the West Shore Park neighborhood, where property owners, perhaps unknowingly, believed that that property was their own private real property when in fact it was public right-of-way. And so it's common that improvements over time are made, landscaping is installed, you know, fences, walls, those sorts of things.
Got it.
And so as a result, what we're saying is that the reality is that expansion of the public right-of-way, sidewalks, et cetera, may require the city to work with those property owners to remove such encroachments in the public right-of-way in order to create the space for those improvements to actually be constructed.
Got it. So I was reading this or understanding this the wrong way, whereas the encroachment would be in the new bulb out. But what you're saying is the back of walk line will now potentially be behind where existing planting, fences, et cetera, exist. In those cases, does the city currently have easements or right-of-way established? I know that in the home I live in, it doesn't look like public right-of-way, but the first 10 feet of my property are public right-of-way. So is that throughout this area, or are we going to have to take some sort of stronger action here?
Right. So in these instances, this plan is based on the existing public right-of-way that's in the city's possession. And it's simply the existing built condition that may appear otherwise, that it's private improvements, but those are actually in many cases in the public right-of-way already. This plan is not proposing the acquisition of additional public right-of-way.
Or right-of-way dedication. Okay, great. So it's just, okay. And then if you go to the shared parking slide for the 2000, I'm a little bit torn here because I do think that the Planning Commission typically agrees with the planning director on these types of directions. But because in Pacifica, we don't have directors' hearings, I'm concerned that on something that is potentially this important, where there's a lot of attention to the amount of parking in this specific plan area, I'm concerned that by doing this at a staff level, we're not on actions that have no discretion or no entitlement required, that we're not providing a platform for the public to comment, and that bothers me. So I will defer to the rest of the commission on that, but I just wanted to kind of plant my flag on how I personally feel. And I think that probably covers my questions on the slide, Chair.
Vice Chair Hauser, if I could provide a response just for the commission's consideration. So it was just those types of situations where no discretionary review would otherwise be required, where I think it was staff's opinion that it provided a review opportunity, right, by someone in the development review process, in this case, the planning director, potentially, without triggering what can be a very burdensome process for small business owners to come to the Planning Commission. Not only burdensome in terms of time, but also in cost. And it's my sense that the City Council, wherever there's an opportunity to do so, is trying to streamline those types of review requirements that I'd say disproportionately affect small business owners in a negative way. And so I did want to offer that for your consideration. I think the vast majority of these types of situations likely will already end up at the Planning Commission. And so it would end up with a recommendation from the planning director to the commission as part of a broader discretionary permit process. And so, there is a balance to be struck, I think, with the level of review and the impact and the types of businesses and their ability to, I think, bear such impacts that we were trying to get at with this structure.
I appreciate that, Christian. I appreciate what you're saying. And again, I haven't really had time to absorb this. So I'm like, I don't want to say like metronoming back and forth, but like, I think what I'm hearing you say is bringing me to this potential concurrence with the idea that the first 2,000 square feet of gross leasable space could be exempted at the discretion of the planning director. But where you're talking about new residential, so shared parking arrangements, there's probably more sensitivity on that. And I wonder if maybe I don't know. I just think that we as a commission need to talk about it, and I'm not sure where I'm going to end up on this personally. And I think it's probably too bad that we didn't get a lot of public comment today on. I hope that if this goes to another hearing, that we can have public comment again to maybe get some more input on this.
Yeah, again, I think it's an unlikely scenario, in my opinion, that new residential development will be occurring without already triggering some other type of public hearing process. And so really, I think the likelihood that there might be a planning director level review and approval, if supported by the commission, would likely be on those commercial uses switching from one type of use to another, or a modest addition that might not otherwise trigger discretionary review being considered for permits. And again, I don't know that 2,000 square feet is necessarily, the magic number. Maybe the commission's more comfortable with a smaller exemption. Maybe it's 1,000 square feet. I think by and large, very many of the commercial developments that will occur under this plan, very many of those will be, 1,000 square feet or less, just given the very small lot sizes and I think the preference for residential development over commercial, unless the commission
also quickly
increases that minimum floor area ratio.
I will also quickly add this only applies to the retail services component, Commissioner Hauser, and not to residential. And I think we can clarify this language to say, and for shared parking between residential and commercial uses. So if it's a residential only project, this is not going to apply.
Mr. Bhatia, sorry, I just want to make sure that I understood that. So I think what you just said is the bottom sentence would say shared parking between retail stores and service establishments are allowed at the discretion of the planning director.
So,
and clarify that housing is not included in that.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. Okay. I would love
this
to
is
hear.
Really for a small cafe or something, coming in and they just really can't do it. They really shouldn't have to wait for 4 months, and it's definitely probably appealable to the Planning Commission, Christian, I would imagine, like if somebody wants to appeal it. So, if you were to deny it or something like that, they can appeal to the Planning Commission, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the question of appeals is a little more complicated the way our code is currently structured.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that there would be an appeal opportunity for that type of administrative determination without further amendments and clarifications in the municipal code.
But you're more thinking that this is like where Saltwater Bakery is, for example, where there are 3 or 4 small commercial tenants. The director could say, yes, we could do shared parking here. But if there are 4 new, townhomes over retail, that would have to go to the commission.
Right. I think either as a matter of policy for that particular parking arrangement and those uses, or just as a practical matter based on other physical permitting requirements for the new development that's being considered. I think in both cases, you're likely to end up at the Planning Commission for some type of discretionary permit that's not within the planning director's purview under our code. And so I think that's just, we're understanding the practical reality and likely outcomes might help the commission get to a place that's comfortable, right, in terms of the balance between review and the detailed and robust nature of that, and then trying to be business friendly and expedient for our very small businesses.
Okay.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I just needed a point of clarification for myself. I know in other areas I've lived in, if you openly and notoriously seize a piece of property and use it, it becomes yours after a number of years. I don't know what the rules are here, and I was wondering if the attorney could talk to us for a minute. Have we given up any rights by allowing property owners like on San Jose Avenue or Palmetto or someplace to actually build improvements in the city right away? Or can we just assert, hey, that's ours and you need to demolish your improvement and make it available, that piece of property available to the city again? So please let me know, Ms. Sherman.
Commissioner Frank, understanding your question correctly, I think you're referring to the rules for adverse possession.
Yes, I couldn't think of the term, but that's exactly what I'm referring to.
So in California, adverse possession rules against public entities it's virtually non-existent. So there's virtually no opportunity for that to occur in Pacifica.
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
Touching on one of the items that Commissioner Hauser mentioned, I agree that I also will have to digest these slides and the red line changes to the Sharp Park specific plan. I think it's really helpful, and I appreciate that this is presented to us right now because we can make a little bit of progress with initial comments. But I intend, and staff let me know if this is achievable, that the commission can receive a red line version of, at minimum, the comments that we had during our last meeting, which it looks like a lot of the major ones were incorporated here in these slides. And then we can review that red line version of the Sharp Park specific plan before our next public hearing, assuming that we may continue this again. Or I guess I'm implying that I would like to continue the Sharp Park specific plan to allow the commission time to review these substantial red line changes, and that we have time to review those red lines before our next meeting. Is that acceptable?
Well, I think we're here to support the commission, through its deliberations, with as much time and specificity and staff support as necessary for that. We would hope it not to be an open-ended process, but we want to get to a place where the commission feels strongly about its recommendation to the city council. It's difficult for me to commit to a particular format of bringing this information back to the Planning Commission at this point in time. Sometimes there are some technical complexities with how we can package up these edits and make them readily available. What I can tell you is we will strive to do a red line format and to release that, at least at the time that we release the next agenda packet, to incorporate as much of this red line feedback from the commission as we can, understanding that, the commissioners need time to review and to digest the information, prepare questions, and then, offer thoughtful feedback and guidance at the next public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I would appreciate that. For starters, even just receiving these slides after this meeting would be beneficial. Similar to Commissioner Hauser, I had a couple initial comments. Sorry, Ms. Moore, if you don't mind bringing the slides back up. Do you mind starting from the beginning? I promise I'll go quick.
No problem.
I appreciate staff's assessment on the boundary of the planning area. And I understand that we need to remain consistent with the EIR. And I really like the idea of adding some language clarifying, improvements that are going to be at Pacifica Beach Park. So I'm in agreement with this, and thank you for taking my comment seriously. Can you go to the next slide, please? I know we had light discussion on removing the land use areas that aren't specifically identified in the land use diagrams. So we did talk about removing beach and commuter parking. I think we landed on keeping conservation because it could be beneficial to designate conservation in the future. I'm wondering what the thoughts were for park. I don't think we have park identified. I could understand that being beneficial to keep. And then utilities, I don't think we have utilities identified either. I'm not opposed to how this table is currently edited. I just kind of wanted to hear follow up on it.
Chair Berman, there is one small portion at Palmetto Park that is designated as such, so I would recommend to keep that in the land use table.
Okay, the park one. Okay. And utilities, is there anything designated utilities?
I don't believe so currently.
I'm not opposed to keeping this in here, but to staff's discretion, if clarification needs to be added, just so someone doesn't go on a hunt for utility land use, but there isn't any. I'll leave that.
Understood. Thank you.
All right. Next slide, please. I really appreciate this table being added. It really helps me. Thank you. Next slide, please. Back to the cross, or was this one before the cross section? Okay.
It was, yes.
Okay. Thank you for incorporating my thoughts here. My initial comment, and I'll have to look at this and kind of digest it, but on San Jose and Santa Rosa, I know that they're one-way streets, but then I see arrows in both directions. Is that intentional?
No, it was not. That's just added line in PowerPoint, but you are right that San Jose is westward bound and Santa Rosa is eastward bound.
Okay. And I guess kind of on that topic, understandably, the diagrams probably haven't been updated yet because it probably takes some time, but I did have a comment about adding arrows for all the one-way streets in the plan view. Okay, so it sounds like that's being tracked. Thank you. I may have more comments on this in the future, but I'll need to digest a little more. We could go to the next slide. Thank you for updating the cross sections. I know we talked a lot about the feasible space for parallel parking. And after that meeting, I went down the rabbit hole and looked at all the different cities and just different guidelines. It does look like 8 feet is more common. 7.5 feet isn't unheard of, and it's, in my opinion, feasible for most vehicles. I'm wondering, Deputy Director Bautista, if you could kind of elaborate on your assessment and comfortability with 7.5 feet. If that's your opinion, 7.5 is appropriate, then by all means. I also appreciate that for this street, there's a pretty wide lane, 19 feet. So some overhang in the parking wouldn't be unreasonable.
That's correct. And after looking at this and looking at other cities as well, 7.5 feet was, a minimum. And because the parking lane, there will be bulb outs. We felt that 7.5 was sufficient for the parking, and bulb outs do provide protection. So, and with these wide lanes as well, the shared lane, the street with being wide, we felt that it was sufficient.
Would you be opposed to, because the traffic lanes are wide, to just designating 8 feet. I don't want to mess you up or really make inconsistencies anywhere, but now that I see it updated, I realize there might be an opportunity to just make it 8 feet.
And I mean, that's certainly, feasible. I've worked in cities where they have been 8 feet as well, but 17.5 is minimum. 8 feet, is, it's also a standard width. Depends on where you're at, but 8 feet, especially with these wide streets, would fit.
Okay, I'll have to ruminate on the cross sections. This one, and then I know there's a couple others. Hopefully, all the cross sections can be incorporated in what Planning Commission receives as whatever form of red line document. Then I think I don't have to take more time because I really want to sit and look at the cross sections on my own. Is this the last slide, Ms. Moore? Yeah,
it is.
I think that's all my initial comments right now. Do any other commissioners have discussion on the slides presented?
Sure, Berman, while your fellow commissioners consider their potential comments or questions, I did want to see if the commission could revisit Eureka Square along the lines of what Vice Chair Hauser was discussing with Mr. Bhatia, understanding if there was a policy preference for the manner in which we might go back and remap the Eureka Square land use designations to be more specific as to a portion of the site being commercial only, and then another portion of the site allowing mixed use. It would help to know if there's like a design imperative, for instance, to try to orient future redevelopment, closer to the street, for instance, and pushing parking behind the buildings. There is policy support for that type of site design in the specific plan. And so I think that type of information should guide our consideration of how to potentially remap that if that's where the commission ends up.
Vice Chair Hauser.
Thanks. And sorry, I'm so, this stuff kind of like speaks to me. So sorry for jumping on every time. I think that I appreciate the idea of doing what you and Mr. Bhatia outlined, Director Murdoch, of having, potentially two distinct areas designated. And I would encourage that habit be incorporated into the housing element as well on other properties that, are throughout the city, because I think this is going to come up again and again. I just, as soon as something is designated a housing site in the housing element, even if it's a mixed use land use designation, it falls under the Housing Accountability Act. So I think that would be my preference, but I also want to underscore what we spoke about last time, which is I think that there need to be separate, discrete policies. And I would ask the city attorney to comment on exactly how we need to do this in light of the state government code for density bonus law. I think that there need to be discrete policies such as separating these out. And then maybe there's another one that says there shall be no residential on the ground floor. And then another one that says minimum commercial FAR in this area is such and such. Like other things that are all seemingly non-related, but all really underscore the same thing, which is that we want commercial at Eureka Square and we want housing at Eureka Square. And so, Ms. Sharma, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear from the city attorney's perspective, like how we can get the housing that we desire and keep the commercial that we desire in light of density bonus law.
So I actually thought that the solution proposed as a policy for limiting development to half the development or limiting residential to half the development, for instance, would be something very clear. I think that would pass muster, the goals you described. But as far as other solutions, I would need to look into how the density bonus law would affect the crafting of the specific policies.
I'd like to, I was going to just say, I'd like to have that information for the next hearing. It doesn't need to necessarily be in the staff report, but I'd love to make sure that it's thought about. And then I had one more thought, but Mr. Bhatia, what did you?
Just quickly, Commissioner Hauser, before we move away from this topic, I think I drafted some language up already. Alison, if you can bring it up on your screen, that'll be helpful. We can, in addition, separately map out to different areas, but I don't think it's necessary to do that because that'll get to be too prescriptive. I think for all practical purposes, this is going to come to the Planning Commission for some kind of a review at the end of the day. They'll require some kind of an exception to something. But Alison, could you just quickly read this out here?
It says Eureka Square housing shall be limited to no more than half of the site. The minimum active commercial FAR shall be 0.03 as applied to the overall site.
0.3, sorry, not 0.03, yeah.
Sorry, 0.3 as applied to the overall site gross area, or approximately 65,000 square feet of building area, which is the amount of existing commercial uses. We will verify that. And residential uses are permitted but not required on top of commercial uses on half of the site. Maximum residential density as applied to the residential portion of the site shall be 30 units per acre, except that an additional 10 units per acre are permitted for every 0.1 increase in commercial FAR up to a maximum density of 50 units per acre. The city may permit residential uses on more than 50% of the site, provided overall densities are not exceeded and subject to discretionary review and approval.
And the reason for having 30 units per acre in there is, and expressing that as a portion of that site as opposed to the overall 15 per acre, is that otherwise the city doesn't get to count those as lower density, lower income units because they would not meet the default density requirements. So this, I think, expresses it pretty well that you cannot really get to more than 50% unless it probably come back to the Planning Commission if they want to, cover more than 50% of the site.
Okay. I like where it's headed. I think it definitely needs to be broken up into separate policies instead of having one Eureka Square policy, because again, it's too easy to concede out of something that's one, right? I also think that there needs to be some level of clarification. And this goes back to Chair Berman's discussion of like the different types of commercial, the neighborhood serving, like all the, I think we need to be very clear that things like, a community room that serves the residential but doesn't have any sort of tenant does not count as commercial. So I just want to, again, I want to be very careful that we actually get what we want here. Okay, that's all I had on this, Chair.
Mr. Bhatia, did you have another point that you wanted to make?
No, this is it. I was just simply saying that somebody had said, I forget who, that we should maybe map out the areas separately, like a residential area and a commercial area. It could be done. It may just end up being a little limiting. I'm not sure it's necessary to do that unless you really have a preference for where residential and commercial use should go,
I was thinking about it a little bit, and I'm not sure if that then just sets up for a subdivision. And I mean, Chair Berman, you probably know a lot about this as well, but like as soon as they remap the site, then all of a sudden we're back to this idea of just a housing site and just you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I think the goal is to get the mix of uses that we want. So I like the idea of not mapping it, but Chair Berman, I would so appreciate your opinion.
I agree with you, Vice Chair Hauser. I have a couple hesitations to prescribing certain designations for effectively different land uses. One is that you're exactly right. You're subdividing inherently by defining the different land uses, which I don't think we want to do. Also, I don't feel comfortable choosing where the commercial lies because this is such a big site. And I feel like there's a lot of ways where a developer can make it work, whether it's commercial on the south or commercial on the north, or, you know, we're looking at vertical commercial and mixed use. So I hesitate to be so prescriptive as to define it in plan view. Are there any other questions or comments before we kind of jump in chapter by chapter again? Not seeing any comments. So just to reiterate, the intent is to go through each chapter. I would like to start at chapter 1 because I do have some quick comments that I'd like to mention and potentially just have a little discussion on chapters that we've already discussed in our last meeting. And then the hope is, at least for the substantial comments that we've already talked about, or if any new substantial comments come up tonight, if that could be incorporated into some form of a red line version of the document, and then the Planning Commission can review that, and then we could further discuss it at the next meeting. And no, I don't intend to review the Sharp Park specific plan into October. So I think we all really do want to do a thorough job, but be done. All right, so starting with chapter 1, does anyone have literally any comments or questions? Chapter 1. Vice Chair Hauser.
I'm just going to reiterate, Chair, for the record, that I did have comments on chapter 1, and I'm going to say this just once, so I don't have to do this for chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but I had comments on chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I explained them in detail at the last meeting, and the ones that I felt were minor, like with the way we did this with the general plan, everything was sent to Director Murdoch and Ms. Sharma. So I'm not going to reiterate them, but I do want to make sure that staff is aware of them and that they received that red line so that when we get our official red line back, those didn't get lost.
And I think I agree with you, and I did have comments in the chapters we've already reviewed, so I hope those are still considered. It looks like they are being considered. And I know Commissioner Godwin and Commissioner Wright and Commissioner Domerat did also have comments as well, and we hope to incorporate those still. Any additional comments for chapter 1? Moving on to chapter 2, any additional comments for chapter 2? Okay, chapter 3, any additional comments for chapter 3? I will jump into, I have a couple. So page 312. Under public and semi-public, and apologies if someone mentioned this in the last meeting and I just didn't catch it. I'd like to add utility districts to the first sentence. So the first sentence would be, in public and semi-public, if I didn't mention that already. The public and semi-public designation indicates public or private schools, libraries, police and fire stations, utility districts, and other civic or community uses. Then next on page 313, the third paragraph on the page, where we talk about specific sites, there's 2 sites mentioned. I'd like to add Eureka Square to be consistent with the diagram. So this is opportunity sites. So just be consistent with the figure 3-4 diagram. So it would be 3 major sites, and then there'd be mention of Eureka Square. Table 3-3, can we add the library just to be consistent with the opportunity site diagram? So under other opportunity sites, I believe that's where the library would go in table 3-3. Then in figure 3-4, can we designate City Hall as a current development project? Then on to policy 3-I-17. It's the second implementation policy 17 about 2212 Beach Boulevard public space. I had comments on the general plan to incorporate the mention of council chambers for this development project. And then also for this policy, I'm wondering if we could add a statement about public access easements, especially if the parking, if any of the on-site parking is intended to be used by the public visiting the beach, that an access easement is incorporated, or access covenant, some form of an instrument that gives the public access. Then I have a question on policy 3-I-28. It's the home-based business policy, and it says, ensure that Sharp Park zoning allows for home-based businesses in all areas. I'm wondering, is home-based business, is that intended to be like someone converts part of their home to be a shop, or is it like a work from home situation?
Right, it's a requirement to be consistent with the home occupation permit regulations for the city. And so I think ensuring that that's clear in the plan, that those are permissible home-based type businesses.
Okay. Okay, I was just curious, thank you. Policy, Commissioner Wright, do you have something to add on that comment?
Just a quick question. When you mentioned shop, being somewhat of a carpenter, I start to worry about noise and getting neighbors irritated. Doctor's offices, psychiatry offices, quieter home type businesses, I don't see as much of a problem with. I just was looking for a little bit more clarification on exactly what a home business meant.
So there are standards contained in the zoning regulations already, and they do not permit home occupations that would include mechanical equipment, for instance, that could cause undue noise. And so there are limitations as well in terms of the amount of square footage, whether the garage can be used and to what extent, the number of people that are allowed to come to the home in conjunction with the business, and so on. So there are ample standards already, and potentially the commission could make recommendations on those standards as part of our comprehensive zoning update that we'll be undertaking soon. But currently there are standards in Article 31 of our zoning regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. Policy 3-I-29. I'm mainly going to use this policy as a platform to say something that I'm passionate about. I know we have a lot of events in Pacifica, like Fog Fest is a huge event in the Sharp Park area. And I would like for that festival to be way more focused on housing our small business owners. Just I mean, even the breweries in Pacifica, breweries, wine shops, instead of asking an outside supplier to supply the alcohol for Fog Fest, for example, like really trying to focus internally to Pacifica and give Pacifica small businesses and craftsmen or women first opportunity to have a booth in Fog Fest and whatever it is. And I'm going to read this policy. I don't necessarily want to change anything about the policy, but I interpret this as an opportunity to really promote our small business owners during the events in Pacifica that really attract other people. The policy reads, it's marketing integration. Integrate businesses and attractions located in Sharp Park into city branding and promotional material. So no comment to change. I just want to use that as an opportunity to say, I think we need to do perhaps a little better job trying to help out our small business owners. Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you, Chair Berman. I agree with you on this concept, but I did want to mention that the Economic Development Committee did a series where we invited different small business owners and different groups to our meetings. This was probably 2 to 3 years ago at this point. And one of them was the board that organized Fog Fest. And then we also had a couple of the local breweries. And we asked this very question of like, why aren't these business, there were rationales on both sides and from some of the business owners on Palmetto as to like why they weren't buying a booth. So like, I love the idea of doing it. And I absolutely agree that that would be the preference. But whatever we do decide, I think it shouldn't be prescriptive, because I do think, I'll just leave it there. I think that there was more nuance when we thought it was just going to be like we also asked the same question of like, can the farmer's market be on a Saturday? And there was a lot of nuance to that answer as well, right? So like, I think that there's more driving it. So I was going to leave that there.
I agree with you. Thank you. Commissioner Wright.
Yes, I was just wanting a point of clarification on why you chose that Sharp Park businesses only were included and not all of Pacifica businesses.
And are you asking me?
I'm asking everybody.
I mentioned it in my comment just because the policy is specific to Sharp Park, I guess inevitably being in the Sharp Park specific plan, but I agree with what you're getting at. I think we need to, as a city, embrace all of our small businesses and try to make our small business economy a little easier to live in.
Thank you. Yeah, that is kind of what I was trying to get to.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, my question was on 3-I-30. If we're encouraging more pop-up activities and kiosks, or at least studying it, and later on in the document, we talk about the need for community gathering spaces, it seems like those two things are attempting to solve the same underlying problem to me. And it seems if we do more pop-up activities, we should be able to allow fewer and probably more expensive permanent gathering places. It seems like we could word something to that effect in that policy.
I am definitely an advocate for community gathering spaces. I'd be interested what other commissioners think or if staff has any ideas. Commissioner Hauser.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely am also an advocate for community gathering spaces and pop-up activities and like artistic exhibitions. but I'm sorry, Commissioner Godwin, I didn't quite follow how you were tying one policy to the other. Would you mind just reiterating that?
Sure. It just seems to me that there's only so many activities that are going to occur. If you have more pop-ups, you need less gathering spaces. If you have no pop-ups, you need more gathering spaces, in my opinion. So it seems like there needs to be a more direct connection of those two. If we're doing more of one, we need less of the other. Or if we're doing none of one, we need more of the other.
I'm not sure, through the chair, I'm not sure that I agree with one directly limiting the other. And I love the idea of pop-up activities, of like the mobile pocket parks and like your temporary art exhibits. Actually, I think Cindy Abbott presented something to the Economic Development Committee about the benefits and the possibility of all of these things in Sharp Park and on Palmetto. That was really cool. I don't see why that would cannibalize community gathering spaces that were permanent.
Chair Berman, if I could interject, I did want to note that there is policy support in the specific plan. For instance, 3-I-6, which seeks to have additional permanent public gathering spaces incorporated into mixed-use development, for instance, in this policy. So I think what the policy about pop-ups and activation was intended to address was the near term, where the neighborhood would certainly benefit from more sustained and regular activity through pop-ups and other types of special events. And then hopefully allowing, somewhat to Commissioner Godwin's point, permanent development to catch up over time and hopefully create more formalized permanent public gathering spaces where conceivably that may phase out the need for some of the pop-ups, or they'll continue to grow and complement one each other in different ways. And perhaps the nature of the events will evolve between the permanent and the pop-up spaces in some different way that we haven't imagined currently. But there is support anyways for encouraging and expanding permanent public gathering spaces in the plan as well.
Commissioner Godwin, did you have any kind of follow-up or elaboration?
No, that was my point. It seems like we only need a limited capacity of these things, and they're relatively expensive overhead things. So, I'd rather do some of one and some of the other, or all of one and none of the other, than all of both.
Is your concern cost? Mainly?
I just don't think they're going to be funded in large numbers, given the overall city budget. And if we had some ability to drive towards some hybrid plan or all of one and none of the other, it seems like that would be more likely to happen to me.
Yeah, I guess the way I was interpreting is I didn't quite see these as a cost to the city, more as guidance for development. So a developer on a lot would have encouragement to provide space for pop-ups if that's what they choose. So I could see what you're saying, and I could also see that trying to promote more pop-ups would inevitably require more gathering space. I don't feel that anything needs to change with what I'm seeing on the policies personally.
Okay, well, sounds like we don't completely agree on that. I've made my point.
I don't know if any other commissioners have thoughts.
Chair Berman, if I may, I just want to also note for the commission that FogFest is not the city's event. And so we do have a limited capacity in terms of managing, the vendor selection process, supply and logistics of that event. Some cities do have policies, and the city could undertake, some type of special event policy potentially that has different or more rigorous requirements, but we don't currently, and it would be somewhat beyond the scope of a singular policy to achieve all of those outcomes for events that are not managed by the city, especially.
Is it, and sorry that I don't know this, Commissioner Hauser, you may know, who's it run by? Is it the Chamber of Commerce?
I believe it's a distinct nonprofit, the FogFest organizing group, that applies for and operates the event with a permit from the city and some logistical support in terms of public works, police, fire, et cetera, with those costs compensated after the event to the city. And so it's a nonprofit event, ostensibly. And so it's not the city's event directly.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Hauser.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I concurred on the last point. I concurred with your statement that the policies didn't necessarily need to be reworded. I agreed with that. And then, exactly what Director Murdoch just said. So FogFest is its own discrete. It has its own board. And I believe this is like coming back to me now as I'm talking more about it. I think that one of the points that was made was that local businesses on Palmetto don't necessarily want to pay for a booth like in front of their store. That was part of one of the obstacles. And then I know that one of the breweries on the north part of town was potentially asked to provide refreshments but couldn't meet the amount that was required. So it's just, I think, and maybe that's changed now. So I love the idea of encouraging it, maybe not making it FogFest specific, or maybe making it I would be open to however you wanted to word it. I love the idea of encouraging it.
Thank you. I don't have a need to reword anything.
Chair Berman, just to touch briefly back on the discussion about public gathering spaces. I mentioned one of the policies that's in the land use component of the plan, but there are several additional policies in the Chapter 5 component related to public gathering spaces, public-private partnerships, and encouraging additional privately owned public spaces with a variety of standards. And so there are policies that support the creation of the permanent spaces, as I mentioned earlier, and the pop-up component is meant to be a near-term complement to the neighborhood to energize it, and then on an ongoing basis could complement those permanent spaces as they're created. I think the plan contemplates primarily private party creation of those spaces, but trying to secure public use through a variety of different mechanisms, given the city's limited funding to create them, create those types of spaces on its own.
Okay, thank you. That was my last comment for Chapter 3. Commissioner Wright.
I had a quick question for Christian Murdoch. In terms of on Chapter 3 on the affordable housing piece, could he explain to me the preference for Pacifica affordable housing in terms of, are we trying to have that more spread out or more densely packed in one place? How does policy and plan support this? And or are we so desperate for affordable housing, we'll take it however we can get it?
Right. I think there is an incredible need in our community for affordable housing, and certainly the city's obligation with the next housing element update that will be kicking off very shortly is to plan for 1,892 new housing units, more than half of which are identified to be affordable to people with low, moderate, or lower income than that. And so we have a significant planning challenge ahead to create conditions for construction of affordable housing. So I think we are in the let's take it anywhere we can get it category at this point in time. The specific plan is not designed currently to particularly be an affordable housing development plan, it is intended to take some steps towards making affordable housing development easier and compliance with the city's housing element planning obligations easier. What I mean by that is Mr. Bhatia said earlier, establishing the default density where the state will accept a land use designation as being appropriate for affordable housing. So increasing that to 30 units per acre, which is denser than anything contained in the prior 1980 general plan. And then trying to include any additional incentives where we can, such as with some of the height bonuses, for instance, along Palmetto Avenue, trying to create conditions where projects that may not otherwise qualify for the state density bonus because they're too small may have some incentive to provide formalized affordable housing. Even 1 or 2 units here or there, we can try to piece those together to make some progress on our obligations. And so I think we would want to create conditions where those types of units could be created in a variety of circumstances, but recognizing that most of the time they're going to occur on sites with higher densities, and those being 30 units or greater, to make them feasible and attractive to affordable housing developers.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you.
Are there any other comments for chapter 3? Understanding that we'll have another opportunity to provide comments after we review the red line version. All right, let's move on to chapter 4. Are there any comments to chapter 4? Also understanding that we'll review some red line changes on this chapter too. I have, I believe, 3. On page 4-20, it's the transit section. In the second paragraph, towards the end of that paragraph, there's mention of Samtrans changes that are slated to be adopted in winter 2021. If that statement could just be updated based on what was adopted, or if it was continued to 2022 or in the future. Then in the last paragraph, just a small typo. It's the second sentence, and the word "in" is missing, I believe. So it should be, as more people begin to live in or visit Sharp Park, and then it continues. On page 4-28, it's table 4-4. The hotels, motels, and inns row under non-residential, the italicized text reads, at the 2212 Beach Boulevard site, preserve all parking for Sharp Park Beach as part of any redevelopment. Although it's a small comment, I believe it somewhat changes the meaning of this sentence. I'd like to say preserve or replace. So at the 2212 Beach Boulevard site, preserve or replace all parking for Sharp Park Beach. Just in case parking does need to be replaced, there isn't some interpretation that the parking needs to be preserved. Then lastly, on page 4-22, sorry, we're going backwards. 4-22, there's a small typo under existing parking supply. Sharp is misspelled to be shark. Let me find it. Public parking is also available at 3 land use focused off-street lots throughout the Sharp Park specific plan area, including Sharp Park beach parking. And that's all I have that's all I have today for chapter 4. All right, let's move on to chapter 5. Are there any additional comments on chapter 5? And so I know last time we reviewed many items in chapter 5, but I noticed that none of them were presented in the slides today. Vice Chair Hauser, I think you had most of the comments in chapter 5. I'm sure you want to review a red line version of that chapter. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair. And there were also, I would note that there were so many items in chapter 3 and 4 that we also kind of gave comments on that weren't reviewed in the slides. And my assumption is just that when we see the red line copy, that all of those things will be integrated. Mm-hmm. And I would ask that if any of my comments in the red line that I sent are unclear, that if I would be happy to clarify if staff has questions as they're going through and creating the red line.
I have a couple comments on this chapter too. So on page 5-5, policy 5I8, exterior lighting. It reads, ensure that all exterior lighting is shielded from surrounding use and directed downward, except where safety and security purposes require otherwise. I'm wondering if that prohibits uplighting of landscaping. And if that's something that the city in general wants to kind of shift towards.
I think it's a good observation that it potentially could prohibit that type of uplighting. And so perhaps we could clarify that uplighting for landscaping is permissible, or apply this to fixtures over a certain height above the ground level. Something along those lines to minimize the potential for light pollution, but also to achieve that nice impact from landscaping uplighting, the ambiance that it can create.
Thank you. I like uplighting of landscaping. I think it looks nice. Vice Chair Hauser.
I like uplighting too, and I concur that it looks nice. I do note that cities like San Jose and other cities do prohibit uplighting because of this light pollution concept. So I wonder if maybe Diet Bhatia could comment on like what the intention was, because maybe we can clarify in a more nuanced way that, is there a certain amount of foot candles or lumens that need to be limited? Just what the thought was here.
I'm not sure if we considered lighting of landscaping, but probably based on our writing of 5-I-9, light pollution was maybe something that we did want to consider there.
If we do allow lighting to landscaping, I would ask that we also, or uplighting, that we also allow uplighting to public art if the rest of the commission agrees. I think that provides a unique opportunity.
I think so too. And I think little features like uplighting landscaping or art helps encourage people to mosey the shops in the evening after sunset. So I guess I think we made our comments or our thoughts pretty clear. Does staff need anything else for this concept? Or I guess Vice Chair Hauser, was your question about uplighting and just the limitations on it addressed?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, like, obviously we don't want it to look like a parking lot or a jail. So yeah, like if I just think that if when you add it, if there's some nuance that needs to be added to the red line, that maybe we can review. And then I don't know, Chair, if I think Commissioner Wright had his hand up for a moment. I don't know if.
Oh, Commissioner.
I did. I was going to suggest that the uplighting hours be limited, and then it seemed like that was partially being addressed, so I let it go. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, jumping back and forth, missing hands.
Right, and Chair Berman, I'd also hope to hear from the commission if that's intended to be focused on Palmetto, for example, and not necessarily throughout all of the planning area, like the east-west, primarily small-scale residential streets. I think achieving that look and feel for Palmetto as a commercial district and destination is pretty understandable. I don't know if the intent is to allow that to proliferate, if you will, throughout the entire planning area. So maybe some geographic focus would help.
Vice Chair Hauser.
My impulse when I hear that, but again, it's like all this is kind of brainstorming, but my impulse would be like Palmetto, Francisco, and Oceana by Eureka Square.
I like that focus direction. The only question that I have is, do we have any concerns with, I guess, by not allowing it or not mentioning it, then are we prohibiting uplighting for single family homes? If someone really wants to renovate their front yard and have some nice uplighting on their trees or whatever it is there any concern there?
I think from my perspective, the question really comes down to how this will be implemented. So if it stays within the specific plan, it's going to be most relevant for projects that are coming to the city for a discretionary permit approval and the need to find consistency with the plan. And that could potentially have the indirect effect of prohibiting lighting of that type for those types of projects. This policy could also support further implementation through an ordinance that has more specific requirements. And so that ordinance would also need to be consistent with the general plan and specific plan. And so that could also then apply to instances where projects are not simply coming through for a discretionary permit, but all instances of such lighting. So I think it is a potential that could come from that type of geographic specificity. But I think that type of specificity, the commission should be deliberate about it. Do you want, tons of lighting everywhere in the Sharp Park specific plan area, or do you want it to be focused for specific purposes in specific parts of the planning area?
And I guess now that I think more about it, it's lighting and light pollution is something that we very often review on a project by project basis. So I feel if we're not too pointed on where we want it, but if the Sharp Park specific plan simply states that it's allowed, then the Planning Commission still has the ability to review on a case-by-case basis on, I guess, most projects, not necessarily every project. I feel okay with that.
I think we can just simply add to say, allow without causing glare. So it just leaves it a little open that if somebody does cause glare, you can ask them to change the picture or whatever, but it allows it otherwise, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah. Okay. I think that was a good brainstorming session. Thank you. Before I continue, does anyone else have any other comments? Okay. Policy 5I-16, building signage. On the note of lighting, if we could just add a statement about appropriate lighting. So perhaps it says, Direct all building addresses and primary building signage towards street frontages and provide appropriate lighting such that they are visible from the street.
Remember, can you please say again which policy or page that was on?
Yeah, certainly. 5I16, building signage. Page 5-11, just a typo on policy 5I31, accessibility. The word ability should be plural. I believe it should be abilities. So accommodate community members of all ages and abilities. Page 5-13, figure 5-4. I noticed there's I believe it's an inconsistency with the transparency requirement for the windows. And so the call out says minimum 60% transparency between 2.5 feet and 7 feet above grade. And then table 5-1 says for first floor transparency, for commercial, minimum 60% of ground floor wall area between 3 feet and 8 feet above sidewalk shall be of clear, transparent, and non-reflective reflective glass. I guess, is it an inconsistency or is it the fact that one is from grade, perhaps the finished floor, and one is from sidewalk?
Allison, do you have any thoughts? I think my sense is it should be consistent and perhaps just rephrased to align with one another. But Allison, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll take a closer look, but I think that generally they should be consistent to avoid confusion anyway.
Okay. Commissioner Wright?
Does untinted glass include UV protection, like for art galleries, for example?
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with the different glass technologies to that extent. Mr. Bhatia, do you have?
Yes, it would be. It depends on, how dark it gets, but it'll not be reflective if you have a UV coating. It can be without being reflective, yeah. A lot of glass already comes, in UV format. It's just a film. If you want to apply it separately, you can do that as well. But a lot of glass these days, you can buy it that is a UV, filtration in it.
Commissioner Wright, did you have any follow-up on that?
No, my intent was just to make sure that we weren't shooting ourselves in the foot with any art galleries. And it sounds like what I'm hearing from staff, that it is possible and still feasible. Thank you.
Right, Commissioner Wright, the intent was not to require unadulterated glass, if you will, but just glass that would not result in a obstruction of visual, perception into these types of spaces.
All right, and moving on. So table 5-1, for footnote 1 at the bottom, I'd like to add existing trees. So this is under the lighting section, and the footnote says projection should not interfere with necessary public infrastructure such as existing trees, lampposts, or other utility poles. And that's all the comments I have tonight for chapter 5, and I'll look forward to the red line version. Any other comments for chapter 5? All right, chapter 6. Vice Chair Hauser.
Thank you, Chair. And I just have a couple on each of the remaining chapters. The bulk of mine were really in chapters 3 and 5. But I would just say on 6 to do a true up to the general plan. Like I noticed that we're still saying 10 fire stations in this document. And then the other thing that I wanted that, you know, like the material comment that I would love to see in here is in section 6.4, where we start talking about infrastructure. And I've mentioned this throughout like chapters 3 and 5 as well. I really think that we would be benefited by a reclaimed water section. It's a different utility, still through NCCWD, but it's a very different resource. And I think it deserves its own section. That's all I had here, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hauser. Commissioner Wright.
I would support that comment as well.
All right. Any others before I get started? Okay. My first comment for chapter 6 on page 6-6, table 6-1, the pocket parks size range, I think it may be inconsistent with what we landed on for pocket parks when we were talking about it in the land use chapter. So table 6-1 says 2,500 square feet. I think the policy in chapter 3 was 2,000 minimum. Just making sure that those are consistent if they are currently inconsistent. Page 6-10. Policy 6I13 is for water conservation. It says require new development to meet or exceed the city's water conservation requirements. I think it would be helpful for the reader just to mention where those requirements can be found. Policy 6I16, the stormwater management policy, just adding the word flow. So it would read, maintain or enhance stormwater management systems, including infiltration planters or rainwater harvesting systems at feasible locations within the public right-of-way to reduce stormwater runoff and flow, or stormwater runoff flow and volume, sorry. And I think that's consistent with the MRP for stormwater treatment requirements with new development. And then lastly, policy 6I20 on page 611. For recycled water, I think we need to add just a little more clarification. So my thoughts are it would read, continue to work with the NCCWD to expand recycled water infrastructure for irrigation of public landscaping and promote awareness of its residential recycled water program. So adding the word infrastructure, or alternatively, if staff prefers, adding the word availability. And then that's it. Vice Chair Hauser.
Chair, I concur with all those changes, and your comment on 6-1, the table, made me think of something, and I just wanted to get a point of clarification. Is the intention here to provide, like the acres per 1,000 persons, is the intention here to provide a more detailed breakdown of parkland per person, or is this intended to newly kind of govern the park dedication and park and lieu fee payment calculation that's in the municipal code?
So, Vice Chair Hauser, I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. I'll start by saying that the parkland dedication fee adopted by the City Council, or the in lieu fee payment, let's say in the parkland dedication requirement, are calculated on the maximum allowable amount of parkland dedication of 5 acres per 1,000 residents of a development. So while the fee addresses one set of obligations, this standard is saying that more than what the city can require from new developers would be consistent with city policy. And so other funding sources, for example, might be needed to achieve that higher ratio. We can't achieve that on the back, if you will, of private development according to state law.
Got it. So what you're saying is Quimby Act 5 per 1,000 is max, but we need more to achieve city goals.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Also, the Quimby Act only applies in the case of subdivisions, and sometimes housing development does not result from subdivisions. So you can have an apartment building, which may not result in subdivisions. So you don't really get Quimby Act fee for it. So an overall fee program is actually a better program. So some cities have moved entirely to a park impact fee, and they don't rely on Quimby Act at all. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you for that point of clarification.
So Vice Chair Hauser, we have both. So for Quimby Act subject projects, we follow the requirements of the Quimby Act. And then for projects that are not subject to the Quimby Act, we have a Mitigation Fee Act fee. They're both limited to the 5 acres per 1,000 residents cap.
Do you think it's worth a clarification somewhere in this document that this is not intended to replace? I mean, I don't know. I think staff is going to interpret the park dedication and park in lieu ordinance and require fees as necessary, whether this document says it or not. So I don't really have a comment. I just was confused, and I appreciate the clarifications from everyone.
Well, I'll acknowledge it's often confusing. And so I guess what we can do is figure out if there's a better way to clarify what this is saying and why and how it's intended to be used. And so that there's hopefully less confusion in the future when a reader happens upon table 6.1.
All right. Anything else for chapter 6 right now? Okay. Chapter 7. Any comments? Vice Chair Hauser.
I'll just echo my request for the general plan kind of consistency review. And I wanted to specifically, mention figure 7.7-4 to make sure that the changes for any sort of kind of, we talked so much on the general plan about landslides and debris flow and all of that stuff. Just whatever changes that we make on those diagrams, let's implement here so that we have consistency.
I agree with that. Commissioner Godwin. You're on mute still.
That would be a good thing to stop. My question was on figure 7-7 on page, I think it's 127. There's a description of noise in there, and it seemed like a lot of the noise was from vehicles. And it doesn't look like you factored in that as we have more and more electric vehicles, they get quieter and quieter, and they have, low noise tires, which are also make them quieter. So were those kind of issues factored in for the future, or are they current noise levels, or could you expand a little bit more on that figure?
Yeah, it's mostly tire noise as opposed to engine noise, which is the most prominent noise from the principal noise sources when traffic moves at a speed. So whether the vehicle itself is electrical or not may play a marginal role, but the majority is coming from tire noise here.
But most electric vehicles have hard, low rolling resistance tires, which should impact the noise too.
So the low inflation, or what are called, I'm forgetting the name for it now, those in my car as well, the ones that run flat tires, right? They create more noise, actually.
No. If you change the rubber compound and make the tire harder, it resists less, so you can boost the mileage of the engine and make the battery last longer.
Got it.
And one of the secondary effects is the car gets quieter.
Well, yeah, I mean, that may be a good point. This is from a mechanical engineer who sort of, went through and did the calculations, and I'm sure they're using standard models for it, but I'm not exactly 100% sure. But the fleet change would also happen over time. I mean, it'll not happen instantaneously. So, it's probably a good representation on the sort of a little conservative, but still probably a good estimate of the noise that'll happen.
Likely a more conservative take on what future noise would be, which I think is good to plan for.
Okay, I just wanted to get that clarified.
Yeah, the intent of these policies, again, is to be protective of residents in the area, to ensure that they are protected from excessive noise levels and building design standards and other land use decision making. And so we could tailor this in the future as the model changes and that fleet replacement becomes broader. But at this point in time, I think this is more protective of the community, as mentioned.
Understand. Wanted to know what your baseline was.
Commissioner Godwin's comment or question kind of was the catalyst to a thought, not a comment, but just a curiosity question. Given that Highway 1 is Caltrans jurisdiction and their right of way is wider, effectively it goes right up to Pacifica right away. If, let's say, this diagram was unacceptable noise levels for residential to be directly adjacent, hypothetically, what would Pacifica do about it? Would we just have to change the land use adjacent to Highway 1 or require like a sound wall? This is all just curiosity.
Right, Chair Berman, I think what you might expect to see is that it could inform land use decision-making. There are noise standards contained in the general plan, for instance, for interior and exterior acceptable noise levels. And so I think for a new project proposed in this area, let's say hypothetically it's a residential project, we would need evidence that the building could be designed and constructed to achieve those acceptable noise levels. There are also existing California building code requirements in that regard. And so it provides an opportunity to analyze whether certain land uses that may be more sensitive to noises can be appropriately cited in these locations. I think it's our opinion that they can, but for buildings that may, for whatever reason, be unable to do that, that could be a point to say, hey, that's not consistent with the general plan, and therefore that type of land use or building should not be constructed in a high noise contour, for instance.
Okay, and then I guess also it would be a reason to encourage or enforce certain window fixes that kind of, and I'm sure Vice Chair Hauser knows better than me, but that limit noise pollution into the living space.
Right, so it may result in non-openable windows, for instance, in mechanical ventilation systems. That's one intervention that can occur. Future reductions in speed limit could be another intervention. Some infrastructural components, like you mentioned, sound walls, all of those could be, potential components to a noise mitigation strategy. But most immediately, in what's within the city and the developer's control is primarily the type of land use and the method of construction for buildings that are proposed. So that's the most immediate impact of this information that you would see.
Got it. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Vice Chair Hauser.
Thank you, Chair. The only thing that I wanted to kind of add was that, so, I don't have anything to add to what Director Murdoch said, but just that, there are so many other highways that have development right up to them, like 101, 280, 680. There are a lot of really major freeways that have figured out how to do this, even with these kind of sensitive receptors. And so I think that with the construction methodologies that are available these days, I don't think that there's anything that I wouldn't foresee anything prohibiting the land use that we've designated.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hauser. I definitely value your opinion. Thank you. Any other comments for Chapter 7? Commissioner Wright.
Just a quick question. Is anybody aware of any more recent data for table 7.1 on page 7-16? It's about sea level rise. It appears to me that a lot of that data is old and seems to have been in the news quite a bit lately, that things perhaps are progressing a little bit faster than we expected. And just wondering if there was any more recent information available. Thank you.
Right. I think the issue is that, to my understanding, these widely accepted sea level rise projections tend to be updated on a 5-year cycle. And so I believe the newest 5-year cycle has kicked off, and that data is not officially adopted yet through the various layers and levels of review of the different agencies. I believe the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration starts that process. And then the state of California, through its various agencies, will be further reviewing and harmonizing that data, and then applying it through guidance for sea level rise planning, for instance. And so we're just at the beginning of that process for the latest update. And to my knowledge, we have the most recent, best available science, if you will, to use that term, for purposes of our land use planning document.
Thank you.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, to respond to Commissioner Wright's question, the last NOAA data I saw showed a few inches for Pacifica over the period of that we're planning for. It was pretty trivial, and there was almost nothing to do to mitigate it. And I think that just came out the beginning of the year. So yeah, it's going to be years before we get anything more current than that.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Oh, I said thank you. Sorry.
Oh, sure.
I'll jump into my few. Page 7-16. The first paragraph, it's a continuation of the Pacifica Municipal Pier section from the preceding page. It mentions handicapped parking. I'd like to change that to accessible parking, just to be a little more politically correct. Page 7-17, just a small typo, to add the word to the first full paragraph on the right side of the page. It's the first sentence. So it says, in fall 2020, the city of Pacifica initiated the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project, and infrastructure protection and improvement project that aims to replace the current seawall. And then my last comment tonight for this chapter is on figure 711. I'm wondering staff's opinion on if this figure should be the FEMA map instead. So most of the substantial information on this figure is determined by FEMA, and it's in the insurance rate maps. And similar to our approach with the landslide maps and the debris flow maps, how we deferred to the California Geological Survey, if we should defer to FEMA on this map.
So Ms. Moore can confirm, but to my knowledge, the FEMA data were used to create this map. Ms. Moore, did you want to clarify?
Yeah, I did. This map uses older data. What's in the general plan that uses the latest FEMA data should be what's carried forward, and we will make that change in this map.
Okay, thank you. That's all my comments on this chapter. Does anyone have anything else? All right, moving on to chapter 8. Any comments on chapter 8? I have a question on table 8-1. I'm wondering if these, and this is the estimate is Sharp Park specific plan capital costs. I'm wondering if this table, if these fees need to be updated based on the latest capital improvement program that was just adopted. If necessary, I would just recommend updating it.
Yeah, I think we'll need to just take a look and update the items as appropriate. My recollection in creating this table was that we sought the engineer's estimates from the Public Works Department about these specific potential contemplated projects. I'm not aware that all of them are necessarily currently in the CIP. This is to account for the various items contemplated in the plan.
Okay, now that you say that, I do read this table differently now, because I was looking at category of capital improvement, and I immediately thought about the capital improvement program, but now I see it's the category of capital improvement. Thank you for clarifying.
Right, and so these projects, for instance, at some point in the future may be added to the capital improvement program and updated budgets provided at that point in time. This is really to give a ballpark figure for the type of funding needed to execute the public improvements contemplated in the plan.
Sure, yeah, and I guess we can't put the cart before the horse. All right, thank you. Vice Chair Hauser.
Sorry, I just saw in 8-6 that it says park and lieu fee and in parentheses Quimby. So maybe the explanation that you guys just gave me can be put in here instead of just referring to Quimby.
Okay, looks like some head nods. I have a question on table 8-3. So under the Clarendon Road improvements, the underpass improvements is included, and this is the maintenance table. My question is, so the underpass, I understand, is Caltrans right away. I know that cities often have maintenance agreements with Caltrans where the city takes on the maintenance of portions of Caltrans right away. Is that the case here?
I would need to defer to one of my colleagues in the Public Works Department, Mr. Bautista or Mr. Marquez.
Yes, good question, Chair Berman. That is correct. We do maintain those underpasses as well as the overpasses over the freeway.
Okay, thanks. I guess on that note, should we add the overpass to this table? I don't think it's included. Probably, let's see. Mr. Bautista, in your opinion, do you think we should add the overpass to this table just to make sure it has, some frequency of maintenance?
Sure. The Paloma overpass, we are responsible for the deck and the improvements. I know that Caltrans is looking to improve the sidewalks along the Paloma overpass, and then once they finish those improvements, then the city maintains it after that. So it should be listed as one of the items that the city maintains.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Berman, I hope that we can take a look at that after tonight's meeting. Really, these tables are intended to identify the program improvements called for in the specific plan, not necessarily to be an all-encompassing, Sharp Park neighborhood-wide maintenance plan, for instance. And so, given that I don't believe we've called out the Paloma overcrossing improvement as a Sharp Park specific plan improvement, it may not fit the framework and concept for that, but we can take a closer look to see if there's an opportunity for that.
Okay. Yeah, and just skimming through here, I believe all of the improvements included in this table are mentioned as future improvements in the Sharp Park specific plan area. So if that's the intent of the table, I agree with that. That's fine.
Right, I believe that is. Certainly we're aware, as City Engineer Bautista mentioned, that Caltrans is planning improvements to the Paloma overcrossing. And I think that may have been part of why we didn't identify that as a specific Sharp Park specific plan improvement, given that it's already in the works and we anticipate that would occur without any particular policy intervention in the specific plan.
Okay, thank you. Then I guess my last comment on this question rather, is similar. I was wondering if the seawall should be mentioned in this table, but because it already, I guess my question still stands because there is going to be future improvement to the seawall likely that is mentioned in this plan. So should we add the seawall to this table?
I would need to think more about that. Perhaps Mr. Marquez has some additional information to my knowledge. Well, I'll just let him go ahead and address the Bieber.
Yeah, I think I would need to understand a little bit better about the boundaries and the need for including it in maintenance for the specific plan to be able to give you an adequate answer.
That's fair. And that actually touches back to a previous comment I had about the boundary area. And I agree with Ms. Moore's assessment on where the boundary area lands right now. So I don't want to necessarily say I'll just defer to staff and whatever staff would like. I'd love to talk about this when we reconvene. And that's all the comments and questions I had for Chapter 8 right now. Anyone else? Vice Chair Hauser.
Chair, if you're ready for me, I'm happy to make a motion to continue this. And my thought would be that we would continue it to the date certain of August 1st with the request specifically that a red line be provided as part of the materials for that meeting.
Yes, and before we get to the motion, I just want to check with staff to see if we have any go backs or clarification questions right now.
I think the main item that I just want to confirm, I heard that there is not a preference to seek to delineate Eureka Square from a land use mapping standpoint, but rather to try to accomplish that objective to ensure commercial development and such that it would not be excluded as part of a density bonus incentive or concession, through other means if possible. So we'll need to research that and then see, if we think there's a strong case to be made that we can accomplish it through policy alone, or whether some type of mapping action may also be recommended.
Vice Chair Hauser.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Christian. I think that the idea of researching it, and if it doesn't, I love the idea of knowing if it's going to work, and if it doesn't work, having this plan B of what a delineation would look like for the commission to review.
Any other clarification questions, Mr. Murdaugh?
None are immediately coming to mind. Ms. Moore or Mr. Bhatia, anything from your end?
Nothing from my end, yeah.
Nope, nothing for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Then Vice Chair Hauser, if you're willing to make your motion.
Sure. So I move that the Planning Commission continue this item, the Sharp Park specific plan, to the date certain of August 1st, 2022, and request that staff provide a red line and any updated diagrams to make the review at the next meeting material and hopefully conclusive, although you can leave the last part out of the motion.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Godwin.
I will second that motion.
Motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote?
Chair Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Wright.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Before we move on to communications, I'm just going to read the statement. Anyone aggrieved by the action of the Planning Commission has 10 calendar days to appeal the decision in writing to the City Council. If any of the above actions are challenged in court, issues which may be raised are limited to those raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Judicial review of any city administrative decision may be had only if a petition is filed with the court not later than the 90th day following the date upon which the decision becomes final. Judicial review of environmental determinations may be subject to a shorter time period for litigation, in certain cases 30 days following the date of final decision. And now we'll move on to communications, commission communications. Commissioner Wright.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that I know for me, it's been a ton of work trying to keep up with this, get my head around it all. I just think it's important to reach out and acknowledge the fact that staff must be even more overwhelmed, and they've done a tremendous amount to support us in this. And I just want to recognize them and appreciate them for all that they put in to making this process what it is. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. I agree with that sentiment. Vice Chair Hauser.
Thank you, Chair Berman. That was a nice thing for me to piggyback off of Commissioner Wright. I wanted to give the commission an update that I liaised to both the June 25th and July 11th meetings of the City Council. The City Council reviewed the general plan recommendations that we made. Every recommendation that we made, they accepted, and they also added some additional comments that I think were really wonderful comments, and I think that we ended up with a really wonderful document. And in that regard, I think it's very exciting as a commissioner to be a part of that. And I also wanted to echo what you just said, Commissioner Wright, about the amount of like the intense and heavy amount of work that staff did, and that and that the team did. And I just really appreciate the heavy lift. So thank you, Mr. Murdaugh, and to everybody else. I also had a question that I wanted to ask about Eureka Square. There have been several people have been commenting that it's really hard to find tenant spaces because there's not really adequate signage. And I know that the commission approved the master sign program in February for Eureka Square. And I was just wondering if any of the permit applications, or if we had seen any progress made from the landlord, because I know that that's something that's kind of going on right now in the community. So Mr. Murdoch, I would love, if not at this meeting, but at some meeting in the future, just to hear back on what's going on there.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Hauser. I'm not immediately aware of any building permits that have been filed. It's possible that it could have occurred. As I'm searching our building permit system now, looks like at least one tenant has come in recently for a building permit, but it's not yet been issued. And so that is going to be a process that I think plays out over some time, given the number of moving parts for individual tenants to pursue their sign permits. And so I will strive to provide some more complete information to the commission at the next meeting and give you a report back on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I wanted to add one more compliment to staff. And I don't know, I think most people don't realize this, but we have a really small public works department, planning department. We have a small staff, and the documents we're working on right now are no smaller than what a Mountain View document would be or a Redwood City document would be. So these documents are just as substantial as any other big city that has much larger planning departments and public works departments. So I think a lot of credit should be given to our entire city staff and the consultants working on these documents, because although we're a small city, these are really big plans, and a lot of due diligence and effort have gone in. So thank you again, staff and everyone involved. Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I agree with all the comments that previous commissioners made about how hard the Planning Commission and the other city employees have worked during this period. I also wanted to say the city council meeting I was scheduled to attend, the item for Crespi Drive appeal was continued. So that is yet to occur in the future.
And one more thank you to Vice Chair Hauser for attending 2 city council meetings and all the effort that I know you've put in. Thank you so much. All right, staff communications.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate all of the kind words and compliments to staff. Some of you noted as well the significant work that went in from our consultants, primarily Allison Moore, but others on her team as well to get the general plan completed. And it goes without saying that the city attorney's office, including Ms. Sharma and others on the team, also undertook a very heavy lift to help us complete the city's first comprehensive general plan update since 1980. And so, we are proud of our work. We are also excited to undertake a robust annual process to hear from the community and the city council on the status of the implementation of the general plan to ensure that we keep it in good shape over the years to serve our community's needs and to not end up in a situation again like the city did with its 1980 general plan, where not much was done over the years and it didn't meet the community's needs particularly well after a long period. And so we are happy to hit the reset button, if you will, on the general plan and really rely on it and use it as an important guiding document for the city and to maintain it in the way that it's intended to be maintained. We don't have much time to celebrate, however, because there's a lot of work ahead of us, including completion of the Sharp Park specific plan and also working to undertake the various zoning amendments that will be needed to implement the general plan and undertaking the housing element update process, in addition to a number of other priority projects from the city council. So our small staff, as you remarked, will be very busy well into the future And a lot of those items will be coming to the Planning Commission in due course. And so we look forward to continuing on the successes that we've established with the adoption of the general plan. So thank you to all of you as well for your commitment to get that process across the finish line and to make your recommendation.
Thank you, Christian. All right, I think we've come to an adjournment. Does anyone have a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Godwin, I saw you went off mute first.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize my hand was still up. I move we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Wright?
I'll second that.
And in a second, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Chair Berman.
Yes.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hauser.
Yes.
Commissioner Wright.
Yes.
That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Good
Good
night.
night.